The Inside View.
The Inside View.
The Inside View.
Who are you? Why are you here?
what am I doing in your podcast space?
What are you doing here? Where are we? So we're in California.
Mm-hmm.
You're an advisor at ADK.
Yeah.
You talk to people about their careers.
Yeah.
And you also made some cool videos about forecasting.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you thought they were cool.
Yeah, I think that's like how I got into forecasting. I just like watch your videos.
I actually didn't know that. Yeah, thanks. That's really nice to hear. Yeah, I was a teacher at the time. I was teaching like maths and physics in a high school in the UK, and COVID happened, and so I was like teaching remotely for a bit, which like sucked. And so like some things I did for some lessons was like make little videos of the thing I would explain anyway. So I had like a webcam set up and was thinking about it a bit, and like there didn't seem to be any videos on forecasting, so I like made some, and I think they're kind of terrible. But like, well, I don't know. I'm happy with the content. I think the content's good, and then I think like everything else about them is bad. But like, no one's made any others.
Would you want like other videos about forecasting to be made on YouTube?
Yeah, I think it's like actually a real shame that it seems like my stuff is the best, and I'm saying that because it like basically seems like my stuff is the only stuff. Mm. Yeah, so I'd be like really psyched for someone to take the content that I produced, or like improve on the content I produced, and then like really improve on all of the other stuff.
What kind of things we can do to improve?
I don't know, man. You've got a better YouTube channel than I have. Like, I think I did everything wrong. I had like a fairly cheap webcam. I had pretty bad lighting. The audio quality was terrible. And which, like, given that I love podcasts and listen to a whole bunch, including yours, like, I know how much audio quality matters. And like, yeah, the fact I just didn't sort it out at that time seems like probably a pretty big mistake in retrospect.
Yeah, to be frank, when I watched the videos, I didn't really care about like audio or video quality. I was just like interested in your takes. So I think like the content is maybe the most important part.
I think most important is probably true, but I think like most important conditional on someone deciding to watch it. And then I think like it's one of the things that's cool about forecasting is you can practice it a bit, and you can just get like you get a decent bit of low-hanging fruit straight away. It's just about making better judgments in general. And so like, sure, the people who had decided to practice might watch the videos, but like, there's been like 5,000 views on the first one or something, and like I think there are like tons of people who could benefit from doing like a few hours forecasting practice, loads more than that.
Yeah, so I think one of the first things in the video is trying out the good judgment project, forecasting calibration.
Yeah, I think it's not good judgment. I think it's OpenFull that made it. But yeah, that's like I liked that tool when I found out about it. And then, yeah, there's one of the videos is like kind of semi-live. And I was pretty happy to put up something where I like really embarrassed myself by not knowing anything about geography. But like, I hoped by saying like, look, it's like a painful process to go through, but like you come out the other end of it better at predicting.
Can you explain what's semi-live for people who are not familiar?
Yeah, so the idea is it's like a game where you just have to like answer a bunch of trivia questions. Some of them are about some of them are about geography. There's one that's like, here's a sort of, here's some data, like how strong's the correlation. There's other ones. And you also have to say like how confident you are in your answer. And so, and this like, yeah, this happens in different formats, but basically like you can then see when you were really confident, like, were you right a lot of the time? And like when you were not so confident, should you have been more confident? And like, this is just like a pretty useful exercise to have hit you in the face really hard, that like maybe when you're like really, really sure something's going to happen, you like shouldn't be. And obviously for some people, vice versa, which is also nice for them to know.
Yeah, I think one thing you say is that when you're 99% confident or 90% confident, it's very hard to be 99% confident. Mm-hmm. So even if you think you're probably sure that something happened, I don't know, in 1945, like you're sometimes wrong. And so people end up being like, saying that there's something that happens with 99% confidence too often.
Yeah, I think I didn't want to make like a claim about other people, but yeah, one of the biggest mistakes I noticed when I first did it was my like as sure as I can possibly be was like about 95%, or like empirically it was about 95%, and like most of that other 5% was like I'd misunderstood the question or misread the question, or like predicted like 1 minus the actual probability or something like that. For what it's worth, I think I'm slightly better than that now. I think my I'm 100% sure about something like a trivia question now probably translates to closer to like 97, 98. But like at the time, I just like empirically was getting just like sort of colossal mistakes about 5% of the time where I just like didn't really understand what I was talking about.
Yeah, I think the problem comes from, unknown unknowns, like, or like not knowing like some words in English or.
Yeah, I think like I think it's so not knowing a word. I would like if I didn't recognize a word, this would be enough for me to be like less confident than 99%. I think it's just like I actually can't think of an example now, but yeah, I don't know. Everyone's had the experience of reading a sentence and just being like just interpreting it, and it's like not actually the sentence that got written.
Right, and the thing about being under or overconfident is kind of visual when you have is it the Poirier score curve or just the accuracy curve? For different like bins.
Yeah, I think this is I think I would call it like a calibration plot or a calibration graph.
Right.
It doesn't have anything to do with Poirier score, but yeah, the idea is you see like you made a bunch of forecasts between like 50 and 60%. Hopefully the number of times they came true was like somewhere between 50 and 60%. And yeah, certainly when these things are like miles away from each other, it's noticing it visually is just way easier than like trying to keep track in your head of all of the things you've said you're confident in.
And then you can adjust, and you think like, oh, whenever I say 60%, actually I mean like 70%.
Yeah, I think I never actually did adjustment that specific, apart from in the like 100% confident case where I was like, okay, I just need to have like an insanely high bar to ever go higher than 95 or below 5. I know some people do that, and I think there are some aggregation algorithms, at least one version of the Metaculus algorithm, I think like explicitly tried to adjust for this with different forecasters. So like if some forecaster had empirically been underconfident at 50%, it would like take their forecast and shift it up a bit before it put it into the average. I didn't do that myself. I was like relatively well calibrated by the time I finished the thing. But I think the reason I got better calibrated was doing something like that, but more subjective. It's more just like, oh, I feel about this, sure. I actually just empirically now I'm pretty good at going, I feel about this, sure. Oh, that's like 70%. Or like, I feel about this, sure. That's like 1 in 3.
So it seems like you were actually already pretty good when you started doing the video. So how did you get good to begin with?
Yeah, this is like an awkward question or something, because I still don't like really think I'm very good at forecasting, but there's like enough data to say that I'm at least not terrible. I think there are a couple of things. So like, I don't know, I was a maths and physics teacher at the time. I'm like pretty well versed in at least the level of statistics you need to be good at forecasting. I also played poker for like nearly a decade, not like ever sort of full-time professionally, but like very seriously while I was at like last couple of years of school and then uni and then like my first few years in a job. And so, yeah, I think there's an effect of just like seeing luck like again and again and again, just like seeing hands play out, seeing situations go the like 5% of the way or the 10% of the way. And like in that case, I can like explicitly calculate all the probabilities. So I like pre-calculated most of them. So like, yeah, when you just see like 20,000 rolls of dice of different sizes, you just do kind of get an intuitive sense. So I think it was like partly that. What I actually did was like read super forecasting and then like think a bit and then just do a bunch of practice. Like there wasn't a full training program I used or anything.
How did you practice?
Like I made a bunch of forecasts, and this is like the main thing my video series says again and again and again. It's like, if you want to get good at doing a thing, you've just got to like actually do it a bunch, and you'll suck to start with, and then you'll get better. So
I know right now we have like Metaculus to predict things, but before Metaculus, because it's quite recent, right? Mm-hmm. Did you just like forecast things about some events or stuff online?
Oh, I started forecasting only like a few months before I made those videos. Maybe that was like, maybe it was overconfident of me to to say, right, now I can teach this. But like, I don't know. I at that point had been teaching for like 7.5 years or something. And I knew I was pretty good at like helping people get to a level that's like pretty close to me. Like most people are like able to teach something up to some level that's like less than their ability. And I think like the difference between the ability I can get to and the ability I can teach to is like probably unusually small. Yeah, so like I started forecasting on Metaculus like round about the start of the pandemic, and I think I made the videos in like September, October of 2020. Yeah, 2020.
How did you find predicting on Metaculus? Was it like mostly COVID stuff at the beginning, or did you predict like AI things or other events?
I think it was a lot of COVID, and I think I got like somewhat lucky. I mean, like the world, including me, got unlucky with COVID existing. But I think that there was just like a bunch of data, and there was a bunch of interest, and there were lots of like smart people commenting, and so you get up in a bit of a hype cycle, and there was like a lot of motivation there. And then other than COVID, there was a time when I was just like making a lot of predictions. I never really tried the like J-Galt or Simon M strategy of like literally predict on every question, but I was like I was into it. It was exciting, it was fun, so I predicted on a lot. And then I like wrote a video. I wrote like an introductory series for like other people to get into it, and then I predicted on all of the questions in the series, obviously.
Yeah. So that's one thing you do in the series, is you take like some specific questions. I remember one about like Tokyo Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
Will they be held in 2024 or not, or something like this? And then you maybe can you explain the different methods for this kind of forecasting? I think I remember one about having a guesstimate model where you have like different parameters.
Yeah, I think I'll like, I don't know, flag very high level ideas, but then like I've got a video series on this. You can just go and watch that. Maybe we'll like, I'm going to point to a random thing because I know that's what YouTubers do. And then maybe there'll be a box that appears.
Yeah, just... Sure.
Yeah, so that thing is like, you can do Fermi estimation. This is a thing you can look up. Lots of people have written about it. Lots of physicists like it. And Guesstimate is a really cool piece of software built by Ozzy Guin, which lets you do Fermi estimation and a bunch of other stuff. Other things I used were like, I explained what reference class forecasting is. I think if you're going to learn to forecast, you should like understand reference class forecasting, and then like you should deviate from it once you know how to use it. But like that's a decent starting point. And there's a couple of other things. I think I did some. I'm mixing up in my head actually. I did the video series, and I also like taught a bunch of workshops and taught a bunch of classes for some of my students. But yeah, there are some other things I do which are like more kind of intuition based, like ways of thinking about things and ways of framing things, which like helps me. But yeah, the basics are like reference class forecasting and Fermi estimation.
Yeah, hopefully there will be like a nice way to look at your videos with a box here or there.
We'll try it, or we can just cut the pointing. And
I remember your profile picture on YouTube, or at least on Twitter, is a spider monkey.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Oh yeah, so the channel's called Dart Throwing Spider Monkey, and my profile picture on Twitter for ages was this same like photograph of a spider monkey, though now it's like a DALL-E generated version. This is because when I was like 16, 17 and first started playing poker, I like somewhat randomly picked a like photograph of a monkey that I liked. I like monkeys. I like climbing. Monkeys are cool. And it's like screaming. It's like, it looks like it's kind of like freaking out or something. And I had some hypothesis that this gave me like a tiny bit of additional edge when I was playing, because like when I was winning a lot, the idea that people were being like beaten by a like crazy monkey would wind them up. And yeah, I just got attached to it.
So when you were like winning at poker, you had like this monkey as your avatar?
Yeah, well also when I was losing, I still had the avatar.
Yeah. I think now COVID is mostly over, so there's like other things to predict. One thing that people like to predict is artificial general intelligence. And
love that transition. So smooth.
What's
the name of this podcast?
The Inside View, to get people's inside views about artificial intelligence. And I guess the last episode, maybe it will be like 2 episodes before, I don't know, depending on when I publish this, was with Connor Leahy about how he updated on recent progress. That was one of the things. And I guess one claim was that if there were like some events that always went into the same direction, for instance, scaling transformers led to like increased performance and decreasing loss with no diminishing returns, like the same rate of the loss diminishing. Then when you see the first evidence, or at least like the 3 or 4 first evidence, you can just like consider the trend will continue the same direction. Like if you're always surprised a little bit, then you could just like decide to be like a little bit more surprised and update more, doing calibration updates more strongly in some direction. And he said just update all the way, bro. So yeah, what do you think about that? Have you seen this video, and what do you think about that?
Yeah, so annoyingly, I haven't finished listening to your interview with Connor yet, so I didn't actually get to this bit. But yeah, I think there are like a few ideas that these ideas are like not just Connor's, right? Like people have been talking about this sort of thing in a bunch of contexts, especially on Twitter, and I think like maybe it's worth pulling apart a few things here. So one thing is like, if you notice that you're always surprised in the same direction, you should at least like check why that is. Like, it's possible you're like miscalibrated. There are other explanations. I think in particular, like, there are some situations where all of the positive evidence you get is going to be in the same direction, and then like the negative evidence you get is like nothing happens.
Right.
And so ideally what you do in this case is like, every day that nothing happens, you make like a tiny update in one direction, and then like every few weeks or every few months something big happens and you make an update in the other direction, and then you get this kind of like sawtooth thing going. And if that is the case, maybe what you'll see is people just like, they forget to do the small downwards updates, and then they do like the big updates every time something happens. And I think if you do the Connor thing of seeing, well, like, I'm not actually sure this is the Connor thing, but if you see like 4 updates and they're all in the same direction, and then you go like, oh man, everything's going the same direction, I need to be like really confident stuff going that direction. Then like every day something doesn't happen, your like downwards update needs to be pretty big. Like if you're expecting massive progress, then a week going by and nothing happening is actually big evidence for you. So like, yeah, there's something there. Do you want to like say about a different part of that? Because I think there's like 5 different ideas here.
Oh, what kind of different idea?
Yeah, so there's another thing which is like, maybe if you see a like forecast plot, so like if you look at Metaculus and you like notice that there is a sort of line going in one direction, I think there have been people who've looked at this and gone, okay, well, the line's going in one direction, so like I'll just look where the line's going and I'll like get ahead of the crowd by predicting that. And like sometimes this is actually correct. Like sometimes the community is just like slow to update or whatever. But there are other times where like every day you wait is like some negative evidence, and so like that means you should actually just be making like a smooth update down, and like at some point the forecast ends. But like, yeah, let's just say if you've got like like, are you going to release your 100th episode in the next 100 days? Like every day that goes past, you're less likely to make the goal by the end of the 100 days. If there's 1 day left, you're like almost 0 likely. If there's 0 days left, you are 0 likely.
Right.
So like you should expect this smooth thing down, and you can't go, oh wow, the first 10 days we've had to update down every day. I'd better update all the way, bro, and go to 0 straight away. There's no way you can do it.
Well, if I published like one video every day or like twice a day for a week, then you might want to like update to like the thing happening.
Yeah, that's just like
days.
good forecasting, right? Yeah, so like if you're in this situation, yeah, maybe this is like a nice example. If you sit there and you're like, maybe on the first day you post 2 videos and you're like, wow, I'm surprised, it's going really fast. And then the second day you post another 2 videos and you're like, wow, I'm surprised, it's going really fast. Like on the third day, you should not be surprised if you post 2 videos. But that's not like forecasts are predictably updating in the same direction. That's just like, now your reference class is Michael produces 2 videos a day.
Yeah, and like the estimate is probably like 50 days to get to 100, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on Metaculus what happened was the median for the day for weak AGI, so it's like a less restrictive definition than like another question about like just AGI, not weak AGI. And I think the median was something around the lines of 20, 40-ish, or maybe 20, I don't actually remember. And after some breakthroughs, I think it was Palm, Dolly, Chinchilla, I don't remember those ones.
I think it was like I think the first one was like Palm and Chinchilla and Socratic models and maybe something else all happened within like maybe a week of each other, like 2 weeks of each other.
Yeah, and I guess in Metaculus, the median dropped by 5 to 10 years in just like 2 or 3 weeks. And maybe there was like another breakthrough and it also went down 5 years. Maybe like in a month there were like 2 like weeks, like busy weeks, and for those 2 busy weeks there was like a drop.
Yeah, I think Gatto was the second one. I think Gatto was like a big update on Metaculus as well.
And so if I remember correctly, the Metaculus prediction had like those 2 drops, and right now it went a little bit more up. Maybe because there's like not a bunch of evidence, or people are like updating up. I don't know. They're just like thinking like, oh, maybe we went too hard on those kind of things.
Yeah, I suspect it's closer to the second thing. So I think there's a couple of things here. One hypothesis you might have, which I think a friend of mine falsified, is like a whole bunch of people saw these results. Like these results were all over Twitter, right? Like, it was impressive. Chinchilla was impressive. Palm was impressive. So like you might think, oh, well, a bunch of new people who haven't made timelines forecasts before are going to jump on this Metaculus question and they're going to make predictions. And so like you can test this, right? You can like look at how the median changed among predictors who had already predicted on the question. And that median dropped too. I can't exactly, my guess is it was Simon M who, are you looking at the question now?
Yeah. So I think it was at 2042 median, Metaculus prediction in February. Then there was like a first drop and it went to something like 2034, 2026.
Yeah.
In the second drop, we're now at like 2029 or 2030.
Has it gone back up?
So I don't think so. I think
it hasn't really gone back up.
I think it was for maybe the other one.
Yeah, maybe the strongly general AGI one went back up. Yeah, so yeah, we got these 2 drops, and I'm pretty sure someone, and my guess is Simon M, because he's done stuff like this before, checked, was it like original predictors also updating? And the answer to that is yes. So what's going on here? I think a lot of forecasters are bad. And like you see a bunch of Twitter hype about timelines suddenly being short and you go, oh crap, I haven't updated my Metaculus prediction in 5 months. Maybe I should just shade it down a bit because everyone else is. And like I think Metaculus is like
oh no, Metaculus points. Oh no.
Well, I think it's just like, I don't know, it's a better source of truth than like most other sources of truth. That doesn't mean I think it's good. It's just like forecasting's hard, especially forecasting stuff like this. So yeah, I think that's one thing that happened, or rather that's one thing that didn't happen. Like it was actually the case that people who were there before predicted down, but like I'm not sure they were like making a sensible update or something.
Yeah, and maybe one part of it is that we're talking about mostly like the median prediction, and people talk about it a lot. But there are like other kind of characteristics of a distribution in forecasting that are important. I think one other thing is like the peak of your distribution.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you have like short timelines and you put like a lot of mass on 2025 or 2030, then maybe like the median is not the most important part. It's more like where is your mass mostly distributed?
Yeah. So I think we were talking about this the other day. So I think there is a thing where when people try to make a forecast, often they'll do something where they kind of like think about what's most likely or whatever. They're just kind of like try and imagine a picture in their head and they go like, oh yeah, this happening then. I'm kind of like least surprised if it happens then. And like often this is fine. Like lots of things look kind of like a normal distribution. Even things that like don't necessarily like obey the theorems which show like in the limit you'll get a normal, like yeah, lots of things are just kind of smooth and kind of symmetric. Like timelines aren't, right? Because like you can't have some probability on like we've already got AGI. And so when you have a really short when you have really short timelines and you think that like you still have some weight on like 2100 or whatever, then you get this like really skewed graph where the peak is like quite a lot before your median. And at least I claim people are often thinking like, oh, when's most likely? And they think like, 2028 seems like most likely or whatever. I don't. I've got like longer timelines than that slightly. But like, I think if people go, I think like the most likely time is this, so that's my median. They're kind of forced into this situation where they then have to have a peak like a few years earlier. And like if they're potentially like halfway between now and when their actual like most likely thing is. So yeah, I think there's like, it's important to know that you've got a median and you've got like the thing you think is most likely, but the more skewed your graph is, the further apart these are.
Why should the peak be before the median? Because, if you have some weight for like 8 decades after your median, then you need to have your peak before, because if the peak was after, then you will have like nothing on the left or something.
Yeah, so like the median, if you think about like drawing a probability distribution, like the median is the point where there's like equal area on each side. And so like, how do you get equal area on each side if one of them can just be like way like further out than the other? You just need to have like, it needs to be higher up on the left.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Would you be open to discussing your distribution, or at least like, how do you think about this thing? Like, how do you go and draw a distribution for those kind of things?
Yeah, I can discuss it a little bit, and I think like you probably won't be that interested. I actually haven't in the last few months like formally sat down and come up with a distribution. I haven't predicted on either of the Metaculus like weakly general and strongly general AI questions. There's like videos I have on like how I made probability distributions in general. I think when I've been thinking about AI timelines, I think it has mostly been in the context of a sort of more general exercise I've been doing of trying to like get an understanding of what different people think in the space, and then like from that getting my own picture. So I can talk about that a bit, but I think that's like I actually just like I will admit, and like as a forecaster, this is like a shameful thing to admit, but I like actually haven't sat down and put a bunch of numbers on things for quite a while.
You said before that your timelines were longer than the people on Metaculus going down. Like, do you mostly agree with the Metaculus prediction, or are you mostly like more bullish or more bearish on AI?
The weekly general one was like 2028.
Yeah, 2029, 2028 for the
2029, 2028. I don't have loaded up in my head the like exact resolution, but my guess is I've got like slightly longer timelines than the weekly general one. And yeah, I think like it depends exactly how you define it, but like most definitions of AGI that are like at all plausible, or like most definitions of transformative AI that are at all plausible happen, like my median's like after 2035, and most of them are close to like early 2040s. But like this is with like very high variance or something. It's like totally plausible for me to like sit down for 5 hours and think about this and go like a decade in either direction.
Do you think scale is all you need?
I suspect scale is not all you need, but I have some thoughts on very small adjustments to scale, which then might be. I have one specific. There is like a minimal adjustment to scale, which I then think might be all you need.
So would it be something like a new model and new architecture?
It is a very slight adjustment to the transformer architecture.
Interesting. Maybe we can move on to forecasting other things. I think you mentioned that you could apply those forecasting techniques for like thinking about jobs or career. This is kind of the thing you do at ADK, not AI.
Yeah. So yeah, I think maybe there's like a median, or like there's a like what's the mode and what's the thing you should care about thing in jobs as well, which I like end up talking to people about quite a lot. So for a lot of the careers I talk to people about, maybe this is a sensible time to like point at the thing again and go like, hopefully we'll be able to put in something that says you can ask to come and speak with me and we can talk about jobs.
Okay.
Yeah. So like for a lot of the jobs I talk about, I expect the distribution of impact to be pretty heavy tailed. So I expect that like a lot of the reason to be excited about those jobs is like contained in the set of cases where things go really, really well. And that leads you to be making a fairly big mistake if you do the thing before where you go like, I want to find the mode, or like I'm going to think about like what seems like most likely, what seems like pretty likely. And I don't know if you've thought about jobs, or maybe how did you think about like how well this podcast would go? Did you kind of think about like what seems like the most likely outcome here?
I feel like it's like a therapy session, or like yeah, I think I saw the video with Ethan Caballero, and I saw like how many like the ratio between like people liking the video and disliking the video and people like the watch time, and I thought like, oh yeah, people really like seem to care about like scaling or AI in general, and I thought that like there were like a big audience for this. I thought that the distribution for when such topic might be interesting for people on YouTube might be like skewed towards like 2025, 2030. And if I start doing it now, it might, be like relevant when we actually have something closer to AGI. So if you have like short timelines, and you think, people will like start to care about AI in around those years, like 2025, 2030, you might want to have most of your impact between 2025 and 2030 when people might like change their careers and have like more thoughts on like what is the most useful way to work on AI alignment or AGI in general. So I guess that's kind of the thought here, is like maybe you do something for like a few years where You're just like growing, and then like when you're like Lex Fridman level, then you can just like have an impact.
Yeah, I actually kind of like this. I have an article called "Know What You're Optimizing For," which like gives some advice on some other areas, which is like not miles off this. I actually think it's like somewhat unusual. Like, the thing you're doing here, which I think is good, is you're kind of going like, what impact do I have when this goes really, really well? Like, and like probably you don't put that high a probability on it actually going really, really well. Like you should be at least somewhat humble, but like it could. You've got like some chance of it going well. And I think that's often a really good model to have, but it's like not a particularly normal one. Most people go like, what should I expect this to look like? And the problem is, if most of the impact is contained in like the tail, it's contained in the cases where it does go really well, comparing options based on like what they probably look like, sort of what the modal outcome is, might just give you a very different ranking.
Yeah, so I think for those kind of things, it's good to try different things before. I've tried software engineering, I've tried AI research, I've tried ops for like a CEO, and I realized that it's just like very fun to do stuff on your own schedule and talk to like very smart people like you. And I guess for me, it's also like low effort. So I just like sit in front of you, have you talk for like an hour, and I don't really have to do like research to write a paper for NeurIPS. I just need to like talk to people, right? So I guess the most of the effort is just like putting those cameras together, sitting in front of smart people and have them talk. So I guess like it's just like a low-hanging fruit in some way that there's like not enough people doing this, I guess, in this AGI space.
Yeah, I guess I should shout out Daniel Phelan right now because I think he's doing like a really good job of this.
Sorry, yeah, Daniel Phelan is great, Rob Wiblin is great. Lex Fridman does some like AGI videos, but he doesn't talk about alignment enough. There is Hear This Idea that people should watch. And
yeah. To be clear, I agree with the claim that more people should be doing stuff like this. There are some other people in the space. Yeah, I think like noticing that you have a comparative advantage somewhere seems pretty good. So like, I think there are a bunch of people who would hate being on camera. There are a bunch of people who would get to sit in front of a person who seems really smart, and I'm happy to like imagine I'm talking about your other guests here, not me, and like feel really intimidated by that or something. So like I think noticing a place where you could be like way better than other people seems pretty good. I think you should be careful not to like only optimize for fun or something. Like you should like ideally find something that's really fun for you or really easy for you and like kind of hard or kind of difficult for at least some other people. Like otherwise you like end up optimizing for jobs which are like like everyone wants to do those, and you're not going to have like a ton of maybe sitting on your couch watching Netflix is super duper fun, but like doesn't necessarily mean it's your comparative advantage.
Yeah, I think they're like the hard things about recording a video or a podcast is it depends a lot of like the guests. So basically you need to reach out to people and record stuff. Yeah. And there's like a lot of uncertainty. So it's not like you have a boss that tells you like, oh yeah, right now we're sending an email to Alex and like put his cameras in. Just like you need to do the stuff on your own and you need to deal with a lot of uncertainty. So like if you're not able to deal with that, then maybe it's not for you. Yeah,
I think there's a couple of things there that seem important. So like, yeah, certainly knowing whether you need like external structure is pretty important. Like I actually need a bunch of external structure. I have a really good manager and I think I'm like way more productive because of this. And then there's like a separate thing, which is reaching out to people who like you think are cool. It's like feels like pretty intimidating. So the fact you're like able to do it at all seems pretty good. And yeah, I've been impressed with the guest selection. It's one of the reasons I'm a fan of the podcast.
Thanks. If you were to do like any new videos for your channel, what would you want to do?
I think I had a whole bunch of ideas, and I think the one that's like most obviously missing, if I had to do one more, is like how to write good questions. I did end up writing a bunch of questions when I was making the series and when I was practicing anyway. So like, and then I was moderating on Metaculus for a long time as well, so I've edited a bunch. So like, I guess I've seen a bunch of bad examples. You can say something about that. Okay, so I think there's like two things that are difficult with writing good forecasting questions. So like, there's something about maybe it's like do an example or whatever. Like, can you think about something you care about like in the future? Like not AI.
Oh no. How many views will I get on this video?
So I think interestingly, this is like not terrible as a forecasting question. I want to like go one step higher up just so I can like use this as an example. So like I think maybe the thing you care about is like how well does my YouTube channel go? And so actually I think like the first step, which in this case is pretty easy, but in other cases can be pretty difficult, is going from like, okay, I want to know how well my YouTube channel go. And then like, how can I turn that into something that like people can actually forecast on? And in this case, how many views will this video get is like a reasonable way of doing it. Sometimes this can be like way harder. So I think like maybe a good example of a Metaculus question where there was like a bit of a mismatch between the thing people cared about and the thing that happened was there was one on whether there was a website set up called isthisacoup.com. And it was this is while Trump was president. I think it might have been after Trump lost the election, but like before Biden was sworn in. And there was a question that was like, will isthisacoup.com say there's a coup going on? And like, this is just not the same question as like, will the Republican Party attempt a coup?
Right.
The website was like obviously partisan. And like, you're basically saying like, is someone going to claim that there's a coup happening? And it turns out the website did change to yes, and it changed to yes on January the 6th, or like just after that because of the January the 6th stuff. But like, this doesn't mean objectively that January the 6th was a coup attempt. It just means like some website said so. And so I think this is like a pretty clear example. And I was actually like, I had a much higher prediction in the community on this question and did pretty well because of it. And one of the reasons for my prediction, I was like, it is much easier for this question to answer yes than for like the reality of the world to be there is a coup attempt in the US.
This is mostly a problem of the resolution in Metaculus being wrong, being like having a bad criteria for resolution.
So I think there's like two separate things here. So like one is like actually just going for like what people cared about was like is there going to be a coup attempt? And like you can't just write is there going to be a coup attempt? So you have to write like some metric that people can like predict. In the same way, like the thing lots of people care about is like, will we get AGI? And then if you look at the Metaculus questions, you have to pick a bunch of things that count. And then there is a separate difficulty. Sometimes these are related. Sometimes they're actually a bit different, which is like how will you actually know? So like so with your like YouTube views, how will you know? And like maybe the answer is like, oh, I'll look at the view counter on YouTube, but like there's going to be a precise time that the question stops. Like what if someone's not there to check at that time? What if that time shows different readings at different like times of day or like in different locations? What if YouTube goes down over the course of like the time that happens? And the thing about Metaculus users is, like me, they're massive pedants and they really, really don't like when there's something like, everyone was predicting the YouTube view count and then like the view count went down for like a day over the course of when the question closed. Like, do we use the thing at the start of the day, at the end? Do we do a linear interpolation? Do we do like a best curve fit interpolation? And so like, heading off as many of these as possible ahead of time makes the user experience way better. And it's like, hard to do in a different way to just like the first thing where you notice the thing you care about is not quite what you're forecasting on.
Yeah, I tried to like forecast one thing. I tried to like write up forecasting questions, I think like a year ago after watching your series. And it was, when will we have something like an open, a free access GPT-4? Because at that time, to access GPT-3, you had to like be in the special beta. Yeah. And I was like, oh, when will we have like GPT-4 and will it be like public? And I had to like figure out what I meant by public, right? Yeah. If like a private beta good or not, like how many people need to be in the beta? If I can have like access to the model by going to like a different website that like charges money to use the API that it count. And there's like so many edge cases. It was crazy. Yeah.
It's just objectively really hard to do.
Even for like GPT-4, like if they like change their name to like something else, right, or like another company create something that is like people agree it is like GPT-4 but it's not GPT-4, then what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so like there's WebGPT, which came after GPT-3 and isn't called GPT-4. Like it seems plausible for many like kinds of questions you would have written, WebGPT would have like counted. And yeah, maybe you try to avoid that by saying like, oh, the training run has to start from scratch. But like, what if there's like some slight change where you don't start the training run from scratch? You start it from like some like set of weights, which is like, I don't know, the weights of GPT-3 plus like a bunch that are randomly initialized. And like, does that count? Because you did actually do a full like 700 billion token training run or whatever. And yeah, it's like really hard.
One of the things people care about is the number of parameters of a model. So between like 2 and 3, maybe there was 10x or 100x scale up in parameters. So I thought like, okay, maybe we should ask like, okay, maybe we need at least 10 times more parameters. But then there are like those like different scaling laws when parameters were like not as important. So maybe you need to think about compute and not parameters. But then like other companies like Facebook or something, they use maybe like more compute, but I don't know. At some point there was like this like mixture of experts models where there was like sparse parameters. So like in total they had like more parameters, but it was like not the same way as GPT-3. So it was like a giant mess. But hopefully OpenAI will release something in the coming weeks or month, and we'll have an answer to this.
Hopefully, in the sense that then we'll have an answer to the question rather than a more general thing.
Yes.
I think that this is like a pretty nice example. I think it would have like been totally reasonable for you to like require parameter counts have increased in some way, and then I'm not sure like whether it will for like the next big GPT update or not, but like you can imagine a world where like Chinchilla comes out, everyone realizes that like data is the most important thing, and you have something that's got like 90% of the parameters of GPT-3 and is like miles better because it has like 2 orders of magnitude more data that's trained on. And like, yeah, if that happens, your question doesn't resolve and everyone's really annoyed, but like, like what can you do about that?
I think compute is maybe more important now. I think people care more about like how much compute do you use to train your model. I think.
Like you can look back and say, oh, the compute would have been the best thing to pick, but like it's not necessarily. Yeah, maybe one thing here is just like an aspect of being a good question writer is like being a very good forecaster, because you basically need to just like make a bunch of forecasts of like the ways your question could resolve ambiguously, and then like add in edge cases so that it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think your background, you said, was mostly like math. You teached, and now you work at ADK on career advice. And so you don't really have any background knowledge on doing like AI research. So I'm kind of curious, like how do you go about like forecasting these questions and form your kind of inside views about those kind of things?
Got to get the name of the podcast in there. Yeah, you're right. So like I have a very like quantity background, but not much AI specifically. I like left, I think, I can't actually remember the date of AlexNet, but I'm pretty sure I like graduated like 1 year before AlexNet or something. So like really missed out on the whole like deep learning hype while I was at university at least. And like I was doing physics, but like, I don't know, it feels like physics now jumps on ML stuff all of the time. So yeah, what have I done? I'm in a pretty lucky position at ADK. So like it's important for me to have a sensible understanding of AI, given that I talk to lots of people about it and given that people ask me questions about it. But I'm lucky because I get to speak to researchers who are at the top of the game. So I think roughly what I've done, and I think it's reasonable to say I've got like a decent understanding of the space now, is I've just gone and spoken to a bunch of people, and I've had kind of a specific goal in mind. I've tried to like, if I want to be like, let's go for some meme worms or something like. I tried to build like pretty detailed simulations of AI researchers, like internal ones. And I kind of think I'm doing a good job if I could like speak to Evan and say like, I think Buck would respond like this here.
Even Ubinger Buxlager is researcher at Miri and CTO of Redwood Research.
Yes. I have actually done this with Evan and Buck, which is why it's that specific example. I spoke to Buck like just before EAG London and Evan during EAG London, and I was like still trying to work out what I thought of the stuff Buck had said, and so I like decided to like try to model him and throw objections I thought he'd have at Evan, which was like pretty useful for me, and Evan didn't tell me it was a complete waste of his time, so like probably my model wasn't totally wrong. But yeah, so I think like what I've basically done is like tried to, maybe a good way of like a really vocab-heavy way of saying this is like tried to pass an ideological Turing test for like views from everyone I can get my hands on in the space who I think is worth listening to. And then I've actually just noticed as I've done that, I I've like always had this thing where like when I understand something, I like have some intuitive sense of like how plausible I find it. And so I like, as I'm trying to understand what these researchers think, without any like additional effort, I just tend to like also work out how plausible I find the views that they have. And like, I think overall I've like got this like large collection of different models, but I'm not really like now running an ensemble. I've just like heard some things and gone, yeah, I'm just like pretty confident in like these things, and then this thing seems a lot more shaky, and have got like, yeah, I don't know if this counts as an inside view, but I have like something which now seems to be like distinct from a weighted average of all of the people I've spoken to.
So in some sense, you kind of you're able to like pass the inside view test, or yeah, you said the ideological Turing test. So can you maybe explain what's an ideological Turing test for the most like part of the audience that doesn't know about those kind of things?
Yeah, that seems like a good idea. So the idea of an ideological Turing test is, let's say there's some disagreement about some position. Let's pick like a political thing. I don't know, like whether you should make immigration legal. And let's say you think borders should be open. To pass an ideological Turing test, you would need to be able to make arguments that borders should not be open, that people who think borders should not be open would endorse as like arguments from their side. So the idea is it's not just can you make arguments for the side that you don't think is true, it's like can you make arguments for the side that you don't think is true that side would actually agree with. And so the AI case, I'm doing like a slightly weaker version of this, and I'm just trying to say like, can I like say things that like this researcher would like probably say in this situation, or like, yeah, do I know what this researcher would probably say in this situation?
And imagine you're at a party and you want to like pretend you're a Republican or a Democrat at some point. You want to like be able to like fake being like the other party, and like nobody being able to like distinguish between you and the other person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a really strong version of it, and I'm not sure like the strong version is that useful. I think that like the version of like I know what the arguments are and can articulate them seems like pretty useful to be able to do in a wide range of situations where there's uncertainty. My guess is to like actually pass as someone from the other side of the party, you'd need to know a bunch about like social context and be able to pick up on their mannerisms and imitate them, and like, I don't know, that seems like a hard thing to do and not obviously useful.
Right. I was just trying to like make a comparison with the actual Turing test where.
Oh yeah, yeah. The actual Turing test is like kind of machine passes a human, and so yeah, maybe the like archetypal sort of strong ideological Turing test is like, you're a strong Democrat. Can you like show up at a Trump rally and talk to a bunch of people about politics, and like no one notices that you aren't one of them?
Now you need to go to like an AI safety conference and pass for like an AI safety researcher.
I think that would be problematic in my case, because I speak to people about decisions they should make, and also like how likely they are to succeed. It seems useful for me to hold myself to like really unusually high standards of honesty. So I would in fact not do that. Though if I would but me trying to do that would be me trying to pass an ideological Turing test.
Right. And is there a sense where when you try to like imitate, Evans Binger's reasoning or Buxley's reasoning, that you're like, if it's easy for you to like understand their arguments and it's easy to use to like think about like what they would say in a particular situation, that kind of means that you kind of agree with them because you see their arguments as something like normal, or the reasoning is kind of flows right?
I think it seems plausible that this could happen to some people, but like there's a bunch of disagreement in the AI space, right? So like if I'm trying to do this for like a couple of people who really disagree with each other, I can't just like start believing both of them at once. And I think this is roughly how I ended up with my like distinct take. That like it's like my take is not in the middle. Like it's like, it's not a single spectrum, but like in the like hyperspace of like views on different things, I'm both not. It's not I've like picked the most plausible person and just like copied them on everything, and it's also not the case that like it's the most recent person, and it's also not the case that I'm exactly in the middle. So yeah, I think I guess like if you just did this with one person, probably you do end up moving in their direction. But this could go either way, right? Like at least if you can't understand their arguments at all, if you like can't work out how those arguments fit together, then you either go, wow, this person is just like so smart, I have to just like totally listen to them, or you go, these arguments don't fit together, I think I like don't believe you, and generally like do much closer to the second thing, or like much more frequently I do the second thing.
Yeah, I didn't mean that like you would update towards like the person you're talking to. It's more like if you cannot really understand what they're saying, and then you should like update towards like maybe I don't intuitively believe what the person is saying. Maybe I don't share the same cruxes, the same like base arguments, and so like imagine like I'm trying to like figure out what Eliezer Yudkowsky is saying, and I think they were talking. There was like a discussion on Less Wrong between Yudkowsky and a bunch of like other researchers, and some people were like, "Oh, what would that even happen in the Eliezer verse? Would that even happen in the Paul verse for Paul Cruciano?" And that they were like, trying to figure out like in their universe, like in their like mode of thinking, would this kind of thing happen or not? Like making predictions about things.
Yeah.
And for some people, it was like very hard to imagine what kind of things would happen in Eliezer verse or Paul verse.
Yeah.
So I guess like if you're like very confused about like what would happen in like Eliezer verse, maybe you don't share the same like assumptions because you maybe like end up in like some weird conclusions that you don't really share the arguments or conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things to say here. So one is like I'm pretty sure Paul mentions a couple of times in the debate he has with Eliezer that he's like unable to do this. He's just like, I actually don't understand like what Eliezer's model predicts here, and I think that's like a good example of it not being the case that not understanding something means you just like instantly have to defer, or at least like Paul doesn't seem to think so because he doesn't seem to be deferring on those things to Eliezer. Yeah, I think this strategy is not one I like necessarily recommend, partly because I'm just like in an unusually privileged position of actually being able to like talk to lots of people. I haven't really come across that many situations where I've just like found it really difficult to predict. There are things. So like I spoke to a bunch of people at this conference. There were like a couple of small things where people had views that I like was not expecting them to. Mostly, I mean, like it seems like I'm pretty well calibrated on this. When I was like expecting people to have a range of views with like some confidence, they like basically thought that. And when I like didn't really know what the person thought, often I was surprised. I think like there's another thing where like I don't know. I've got no idea what Scott Garrabrant thinks about AI.
Scott Garrabrant, researcher at Muri.
Yeah, I like started listening to the interview he did with Daniel Phelan, and then one of them said at the start, "Oh, you should listen to this talk that Scott gave first." And I was like on a bus, and I didn't want to like look at my phone, and the talk had slides, so I like didn't want to listen to the talk, and so I like listened to a bit more of the podcast and went, "Oh man, I really should watch this talk first." And so I've like not got around to getting back to the episode, and then like. I listened to both of Daniel's interviews with Vanessa Kasoy, and I don't know, man. I could like follow each sentence and like just about understand what the sentence meant. But this was like one of the cases where I didn't really feel like I was then having this like intuitive reaction where I like my brain was also doing this thing where it like decided how plausible the things were. I was like just about able to follow the reasoning, but I was like not confidently able to predict the next like step of the reasoning. I haven't spoken to Vanessa. I'd like to read some more of her work, though. I know that she's looking for distillers because I think it's like pretty hard for lots of people to understand. But so like I haven't really incorporated her thoughts into my model at all yet. So like roughly what happens in those cases is I just like have not yet updated because I like don't feel like I've processed enough information to really update.
And when you encounter like a new question, I don't know, when will GPT-4 arrive? Like how many parameters it has, or what will be like the performance or like test loss of this model, or what will be the new DALL-E, or what will be the actual GDP growth in like 5 years because of AI? For those kind of things, like how do you actually think about a thing? Do you like model like, oh, what would Paul think about this thing question, or do you just like do forecasting, normal forecasting?
Yeah, I mean, so like somewhat disappointingly, probably for listeners, I just like haven't made that many forecasts in the last few months because I've been like really busy trying to do a lot of my new job. Like, I don't know, AI seems like a big deal, and the best way it seems for me to like help with that at the moment is like help people move into places where they can have an impact on it. And so I've basically been prioritizing that over forecasting. What would I do? My guess is I would do like a bunch of things that I did in the video series. I'd basically like make a large guesstimate, split into different worlds, which if you watch the video on it, you'll know what that means. And then like what would I do for each of the individual worlds? Like once I decomposed it a bunch, I think I'll probably like go with my own take. I'd like read some stuff, refresh myself of some memories. But like, yeah, I'm at the level now, or like the way my understanding worked is like, I've spent a bunch of time trying to predict what different people would think. And now I've just like have some sort of conclusion from that, which is some combination of like a weighted average of their judgments and like my intuitive responses to them.
So what I meant is like more for some of the like reports we had, let's say the economic growth, the impact of an economic growth of AI, those kind of things.
Yeah.
For like, would it lead to some singularity in some year, or when will we get transformative AI? For those kind of things, do you defer to certain people? Do you like have some disagreements on what people say about those things?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, there's stuff like the Rudman paper that came out of philanthropy. So this is one where there's like doing a bunch of curve fitting to economic growth.
Can you maybe like explain the paper for people who are not familiar?
Oh, that's what I was trying to do. There's a bunch of curve fitting for economic growth. Okay, so yeah, the rough idea is like if you look at GDP throughout history, really, really zoomed out, it's going up. That's obvious. But like it seems to be going up faster and faster. That's obvious. And like the rate at which the gradient is growing also seems to be growing. And it actually seems to be what's called like a super exponential. So it's like it's growing faster than exponentially. And like there's a bunch of problems with this model, right? Like to start with, it's pretty difficult to get estimates of GDP in like hunter-gatherer eras or like pre-industrial revolution. But like but the range of estimates is like a few orders of magnitude, and you still get like the rough general same. So anyway, you draw this like relatively smooth curve through GDP throughout history, and like the shape of that curve is such that it like goes vertical before 2100, and like does that mean we're going to get infinite growth before 2100? Obviously not. But it means like something weird's going to happen, at least according to this model. I think some people find this, well, like this sort of thing could be used to do two different things, and you might have to like remind me what they are. So one is like make an active prediction, and one is like respond to a reference class, like respond to another reference class argument. I'm pretty unsympathetic to people using these for active predictions. So the idea here is like maybe, so maybe someone's just like, okay, so in 2060, if that's the vertical line, I think it's the vertical line, we're going to get something as crazy as infinite economic growth. Maybe it'll be AGI. So like I predict 2060, infinite economic growth, AGI. I think like it's just not obvious that this is the best reference class. And like the thing about reference classes is like it's really easy to use them and it's really hard to know which ones to use. So like I don't like it as like something as active as that. But then there's another thing which hopefully you're going to remind me of, and then I don't have to monologue for so long.
So you said active prediction, and the second one was respond to a reference class. So I think you said the second one, but not like. So why do you need to make active predictions? What do you mean by active predictions?
Oh, so the active prediction one is the thing I just said, which is like I've like done this curve fit, so now I think 2060. I'm not super excited about using models for that.
And so how do you respond to a reference class?
So what I'm doing here is like I think there is a class of sort of skepticism about the need for safety, or skepticism about AGI, which goes something like this. In general, you should use like reference classes to determine your forecasts. What this means, roughly translated, is like you should predict things to carry on roughly how they are. And then people say, things carrying on roughly how they are doesn't look like we get, AI takeover and everyone dropping dead. So you should have like a very high burden of proof for the like sort of step-by-step arguments, logical arguments, in order to claim we're going to get something like wild like AGI in the next few decades. And I think a really strong response to this line of argument is to say, what do you mean everything continues as normal means we don't get anything weird? Everything continues as normal means like we should look at sort of curves and different things and expect them to carry on smoothly. And like if you look at curves and a bunch of different things and expect them to carry on smoothly, you get like really weird behavior pretty quickly. And so like that's the sense in which I think they're really useful. And there are like other versions like this. So you might think, hey, like humans have been around for a while, like we'll probably carry on being around for a while. Like maybe it's like really weird for like a sort of civilization to just disappear, and you can like if you go through like geological time, you can go like had like single-celled life, and we had like multicellular life, and we had like mammalian life, and we had like the dinosaurs disappeared or evolved into birds. I'm not really sure what the state of the art is there, but like there have been big transitions in the past, and if someone's like, we should expect no big transitions, you might turn around and say, but there have been some big transitions. So the idea is like it's not like a positive case, but it responds to the argument that says you should have an unreasonably high burden of proof because like so far everything's looked pretty normal.
So you're saying that so far things have not been normal, that we have like some sharp transitions before, and there's going to be more weird stuff, but not like a weird like singularity in 2050 or 2060.
Or I mean, there might be, I don't know, but like I think curve fitting does not give you like enough evidence to like just go, okay, so now you should be confident there's like this weird thing happening then. But it does give you enough confidence to go like, oh man, I should actually look at the object level now because like my like reference class doesn't say normal stuff, don't really worry about it. Maybe we can like link to some our world in data graphs where if you just look at GDP growth throughout history, yeah, just do the pointing up. Sorry for podcast listeners, this is going to suck for you.
So the only thing I know about, those kind of things is this like picture on Twitter where I try like, do curve fitting on like GDP before 2047, something like this. I think it was 2045, 2047. And it was like some kind of power law.
Yeah.
So if you kind of feed a power law between like, 10K years before BC and like 2047, you have this like weird singularity in 2047.
I didn't realize it's 20. I thought it was 2060. Yeah. Anyway,
something
so
like
like,
that.
Yeah, it's these kinds of things, and yeah, I guess what I'm saying here is like, this at least means you have to like look at what's happening in the next few decades and make a judgment call. I don't think it is like enough on its own to say, hey man, like everything's going to get super wild. But it's enough to go like, some things might get super wild. We should look. And if we then find strong arguments to believe things should get super wild, we don't get to retreat to like, oh, but like we should make normal predictions most of the time.
So the burden of proof, should we actually ask for a high burden of proof if people make like weird claims?
I mean, like in general, one should like have some high burden of proof if people make weird claims. But I think like if you're specifically saying a claim that like economics is going to go crazy in the next few decades is a weird claim, I think like the sort of curve fitting exercises are enough to say, no, you don't get to claim that as weird. You don't get to claim high burden of proof there.
Yeah, I think one kind of weird, so somewhere where I don't like fully understand Alex Lawsen's model is you say something like this: the years for weekly version of AGI, or the other question. I think it was the other question about AGI is something 2040-ish or 2050, and you also say that like you don't expect to have like this like singularity in economic GDP growth in like 2060 or something. And so for me, like people seem to like anchor on the AGI Costra's biological anchor report on like transformative AI, I think around 2045 or something. And if you believe this, then the GDP capital or something will grow a lot, right, between 2045 and 2060. Like if you just like believe this report or the average of this report. So yeah, is in your model, what happens, between transformative AI and AGI? Like,
oh yeah. So to be clear, I'm not saying I think that there is like not going to be a technological singularity. I'm claiming that like curve fitting to economic growth models is not sufficient reason to believe that on its own. You can then look at the development of AGI and predict that happens by 2050, and then you can say, wow, economic stuff's going to go wild after that point. But like then the reason you're saying that is because of like a combination of factors, including actually having like a gears level model of what's happening. Yeah, so like this is a claim about like the growth models are like, in my view, sufficient to like say you should look at the next few decades carefully and see what's going on, but are like not sufficient on their own to like allow you to confidently predict what will happen.
What are like other things people could look into to have more confident predictions on this?
I don't know, like don't you have a whole podcast about AI or something? I think Holden Konofsky's blog Cultics is like a good place to start if you want to think about things that are going to be happening in the next few decades and whether they're going to be wild or not. His like most important century series is like a really good introduction. Yeah,
I think that's a great opening for the end of the video, so that people can just like look at other things, and the whole like podcast about AI forecasting. Hopefully there will be like more videos. You can do one more thing about your forecasting videos as well.
Cool. Yeah, let's do if you want to see me chat about forecasting with like terrible production value, you can click over here. And if you want to like speak to me about your job, you can click over here. And if you're listening to this in a podcast, like go to youtube.com and search for The Inside View.
I think the problem is that you can only do like 2 links at the end of the video and not like 5, but I'll find a way to like add some like stuff, add some links. Yeah, it was nice talking to you, and hopefully it will not be the last one.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool, we did it.